number 8, you talked about, you said, did you write these questions yourself?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So, is discomfort a natural part of the learning process? In Toastmasters, fear and anxiety is something a trainer will need to take into mind. What are some of your tactics for dealing with this?
And you don't have to
my own
talk
fear and
just about
anxiety, not
I'm thinking of the audience.
So that the audience might have fear and anxiety, or that you as presenting to them might have fear and anxiety?
The audience presenting. But you could also address your own fear and anxiety.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Am I supposed to be thinking about Toastmasters? Because you mentioned it a couple of times, but I'm thinking about my professional experience in trainings.
Just because Toastmasters is where I've seen you, I drew on some of those questions, but I try to keep them few, and you don't have to just talk about Toastmasters. Yeah. You can just talk about experiential learning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I could write answers forever, or we could talk.
Okay.
You want to do it?
Let's talk. Hi, Molly.
Hi. How are you? Do you want me to look at you rather than the camera?
Yeah. I think they're going though.
Okay.
Okay. So Molly Lineberger, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes. My name is Molly Lineberger, and I am an enrollment manager here at the Monterey Institute. My career has been varied in that I started out here as an MBA student, and then I left the Monterey Institute for a number of years after working here, and then came back to work here again. So I'm originally from Montana and started learning languages at a young age and really wanted to work internationally from a young age. So Monterey Institute was my pathway to doing that, and I came back to Monterey Institute because I really believe in the education and training that we provide people here.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So given your background, what experience do you have training and educating adults specifically?
For training and educating adults, I have the experience firstly with DPMI. I was a project coordinator for the Development Project Management Institute, and I was able to work with the trainers in that program and do some co-facilitation and training of the students. So that was my first experience in training adults. When I left DPMI, working for DPMI, I had the opportunity to work in a professional setting doing training for adults in 2 different jobs. The first one was working for the Business and Professional Women's Association of Amman in Amman, Jordan, and I did business trainings for women, and I taught them how to use some simple marketing techniques. I taught them about how to write a business plan, and so I did some trainings for women in that context. But my most memorable and rewarding experience of training adults was when I was living in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, before, during, and after the 2010 earthquake, and my position was the head of protection, and so I was training my own staff. We had a staff of 39 adults that we were training on how to teach protection issues in camps, and also later about hygiene promotion that needed to happen in camps and in residential centers and orphanages for adults and children. That was my most rewarding experience training adults because it was very experiential, and I got to see them using those skills that I trained them in a professional setting.
And this is with refugees?
You
were training the adults within the program?
Yes, and we called them internally displaced persons because it's all within the same country. So, yes, so IDPs, IDPs in camps, and they were, the staff that I trained were Haitian staff, so the French, I was using my French and Creole in my trainings. and then they had to turn around and be able to give that training to adults. So I would teach them how to present on protection issues, or I would teach them how to use the oral rehydration salts or the chlorine to sanitize water, and then they would go and teach it to the communities, all ages.
How did language come into play with your training?
It was challenging. Adding to a natural discomfort that you might already have in having to present and train people, I had to learn how to do it in another language. And I think that's something that a lot of Monterey Institute students face if they're going into a context where they're working in development, or they need to be very comfortable with training in another language. And that's expected in the organization I was working in, that you had to be at that level with French. I would rely on some of the materials. For most of these things that I was training, there were set materials, like from the United Nations, about this is how you do this hygiene promotion. And so I had all the vocabulary and all of the information I needed, but I needed to be able to present it convincingly, and also to be able to really transfer some knowledge to people by showing that I understood it well. So I did do a lot of preparation when I would have to do one of these trainings.
Interesting. Wow. So, have you trained and educated youth, and can you talk about the differences working with children and adults?
Yes. I have educated and trained youth. I've never been a teacher or anything like that, but I do volunteer for an organization called AFS, which is a high school exchange program. So we train students for going abroad, and we give them cross-cultural orientation about what it's going to be like when you go overseas and things like that. So I do a one-day training here on campus in the spring. We invite high school students from all around, and we do this training. It used to be Professor Peter Grote that did it, and now he passed last year, and so I've carried on the torch with that. What I can say about the difference in training in children or adults, both children and adults need to be energized and engaged. So even adults, I've done trainings with adults where it feels silly, but we do a game, or we do some sort of thing where we're getting to know each other, or we're learning each other's names, or we're throwing a ball, and it's something that feels silly. But in other cultures, I find it's appreciated even more here. I think Americans are adults think that kind of thing is kind of silly, but in some other countries I've been, they love getting the chance to get to know each other, or to sing, or to do something that's a little bit less structured and more fun, and that really keeps them engaged in a training. So I think that would be a similarity, that they both need to be energized and engaged, and that a difference would be that maybe you can give more complex information to adults, but with children you still need to give the same amount of respect of just giving them information and treating them like they're able to understand it. When I was doing the hygiene promotion for children in orphanages, we had these cards that were given to us by the United Nations, and they showed different scenarios of bad hygiene, like there's a goat walking through your kitchen and stepping in the water bowl, and so we'd show these pictures, and I would speak to these kids in Creole because they didn't speak French. So like, what's going on in this picture, and what do you see? And so more kind of experiential things like that with children to try to get them to think. With adults, you can give them more complex and more logical information that they can work through themselves.
Great, thank you. So, what do you see the difference being between training and educating? Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but do you see a difference?
I absolutely see a difference. I think that training is where you are passing along some concrete skill, where you're actually expecting to show some sort of behavior. With training, you're wanting to get some sort of outcome with what that person is going to go do with it. With education, it can be just a transfer of knowledge. So you're teaching somebody math, but you're not expecting them to show you or to do something that demonstrates that behavior necessarily. I mean, they can demonstrate their knowledge, but training is showing someone how to carry out a skill that's going to make a difference in their daily life. That's how I see it. Whether it's your daily life in work, or your daily life in how you interact or how you use a product. You know, you have to, if you want to see a change in behavior, there needs to be a hands-on training.
Okay. That's why we talk a little bit about with facilitation. That goes along more with training, because you're sort of helping them pull out whatever that is.
Right.
To stay with them longer.
Exactly.
Great. So how, as a trainer or educator, now that we've made that distinction, how can you gauge the needs of your audience?
I think it's important to do some sort of needs assessment. It's not always possible to know exactly what your audience needs, but it's fine to start out a training with having some participatory needs assessment, very informal, just like asking how many people here have this experience, what are you expecting from this training. It's good to let people know that they're able to put forth their own expectations and tell you what they're looking for. Because it would be completely possible to walk into a training or a room and start delivering something that was totally inappropriate and that didn't meet the needs of those people. I can think of 100 examples from Haiti. We did so much, we learned so much in so many of the things that we did. Brief explanation of one example. We were doing a training on protecting the population in a camp, and we decided we would give this training to a self-appointed security force in the camp that were putting themselves in charge of being security. So we said, okay, we need to teach them about what the population needs, and just from a general basis, very, very broad humanitarian basis, what the people need. And later found out that this self-appointed security force were some of the people that were actually creating the human rights abuses in the camps and using their position of security guards as power, and they had the baton and the flashlight or whatever, and they could intimidate people and they could abuse people and they could rape people. And that was a really really difficult situation, because we needed to find out who were the right people who needed training, and what we ended up doing was working more with the women in the camp to find out what their needs were and doing trainings for them about advocacy and about self-care and about reporting measures for abuses and prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, which is a huge thing. So you really have to know your audience, and that's an extreme case. If you were doing a training for a work or a workshop or something, you could do a quick and dirty needs assessment, and people would tell you what they were expecting to learn. But it's really important when you're designing a training that you're designing it appropriately for your audience.
Definitely. What happened to those men?
Well, we had to have intervention from the police and also a local pastor who was kind of a respected authority in the area to kind of disband them. And because this was a problem in a lot of camps in Haiti, that they were essentially run by gangs. And the gangs would put themselves forward to the NGOs and say, give us the stuff, give us the resources, we know the community, we'll be able to distribute it. And a lot of NGOs fell into that trap because there were so many urgent needs and a few people that were stepping up to say, hey, I'll help, but not knowing if they had the right motives. So that was a huge, huge problem for a lot of NGOs.
So similar to that question, how do you take different learning styles to mind when working with adults?
Different learning styles. Well, you can see it when you have a group of people together. You can see that people learn differently, and some people naturally kind of like to be participatory and like to raise their hand and want to be a part of the conversation, whereas other people might be more silent. So you can try to pull people out a little bit, but also try to design the different portions of your training so that they meet different people's needs. So maybe not a whole training that's just a lecture, but having other times where there's breakouts and there's group work and there's opportunities for people to have a voice in a smaller setting if maybe they're not used to being vocal in front of a lot of people or going up to the board or whatever it is. So providing different formats to your training would be one way to meet different learning styles.
So this is a question we were talking about earlier. discomfort is a natural part of the learning process. How do you take the fear and anxiety of the audience into mind when training or educating?
So the audience is having fear and anxiety while you're teaching them?
Maybe I'm thinking in Haiti, I mean, the situation was dire, and maybe they were unsure of what they were doing. I mean, there's just an anxiety for wanting to do the right work.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, people were anxious. I can give another example of training caregivers in orphanages on hygiene promotion, where people were dying of cholera. There was one center that lost 10 children in a week to cholera, a disease that is preventable and treatable, under the right circumstances, if you have the right supplies. And so people were in a panic. So it was hard to get through to people and to try to tell them, the appropriate amount of chlorine to use, because if you use too much, then you can get sick, and all these things. So you really have to be respectful of people's emotions if it's a difficult situation. I also was in several trainings where international staff would come in, and this was a month or two after the earthquake, and they would want people to share their experience about what happened in the earthquake. Just like, everybody share your experience, and people would start going around and saying, that my house fell on my brother and my, people died, and it was so hard, and they didn't understand that it was so hard for them to have to talk about it. So you really have to gauge the emotional preparedness of your target audience to assimilate and to kind of go along with the information you're trying to teach them. But if their fear and anxiety is just about how they're going to teach what you're teaching them, or train what you're training them in, or carry out what you're training them in, it's good to try to offer resources for them, let them know that they have resources if they have more questions, that if they don't do it perfectly, that it's okay, and that this is a learning process, and that you'll learn. This is on the job training, so you're going to have to learn how to do it as you go, and you're going to find situations that are difficult, and you're going to learn from them, and you can report that back to the group, and we can learn together. Just making it a really safe environment for learning, and also teaching that everybody has their different style, and you have to find your own voice in your facilitation style. So some people think, I can't be a trainer because I'm really soft-spoken, and I don't have a loud voice, and I don't have a big boisterous personality, so how am I going to lead a group of people or train a group of people? And just teaching that everyone has their own style, and everyone has their own voice, and everyone can be effective. I mean, I don't know, I'm really influenced by my mentors. So I'm thinking about, Professor Bell Levenger, who sits at a desk and whose voice is soft, but says some of the most impactful things that are still in my brain, and that stay with me about things that I've learned about this field. She doesn't get up and run around and fly her arms and jump around.
Yeah, that's true.
But some of the things people listen, and some of the things it almost came out of my mouth earlier, and I stopped myself from saying it because I'm not trying not to steal her quotes, but a change in knowledge doesn't equal a change in behavior. I mean, I took that class 10 years ago. That's what I'm still hearing in my mind. A change in knowledge does not equal a change in behavior. So everybody gets to find their own voice in facilitation and training, and that's what I really like about it, because everyone has something to share.
Excellent. Similar to this, and this has come up a lot in DPMI, which I took in January, also in this class, how do you, I don't want to say deal with, because that's negative, but how do you handle training or educating people who are older than you, maybe have had a lot more experience, wiser? What techniques do you use? And have you been in that situation?
I have been in that situation. In Haiti, I was training, I did a training for doctors and people in hospitals about issues around protection and making sure that families didn't get separated in situations of disasters and emergencies. So it's intimidating sometimes to be talking to people who are very advanced in their careers, and maybe in the area that you're even talking about. Maybe you're doing a training for someone who's, you know, on communication, who's in communications or something. So it can be intimidating, but the important thing is to have respect and show your respect for people and talk to them respectfully, and not like acting like you are having to teach them something new because their way is the old way. And that's sometimes the frustration that you might find, that, you know, you're coming in with a new technique or something new that maybe they've been doing a certain way for a really long time, and you have a way that you're trying to introduce, and that can be a difficult situation. I've been in that situation. So the way to do it would be to be very respectful and very logical, and showing the benefits of using a new particular system, and being humble is very important in many cultures as well.
Yeah. We were talking about, this is sort of similar, how we should look at people's assets and not as deficits. And so it's the same idea, I guess, with their preconceptions. Don't look at them as a downfall, but how can you use them to change what they think?
Yeah, and to build upon what they already know and to make it better.
I'm gonna check and see if this is actually still recording.
I think that one the light is on, so. I hope this is just for you. You're not going to show it anyway. But if you do it, I'll forgive you.
Show what?
The video.
Oh, just little bits and pieces here and there.
Okay.
So let's see where we are. Number 10. And you don't have to talk about Toastmasters, but I'm thinking of learning that's done in an experiential way or in a highly contextualized way, which I feel like Toastmasters, we're learning in the actual business meeting setup. But then also, I mean, you're in Haiti, and how more contextual can you get? It's real life. So how do you use that environment in your training? If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, in Haiti, it was, you know, people had to learn by doing. There was so much happening so quickly, and people had to learn as they went, which was challenging for a lot of situations. A lot of people there hadn't done, you know, large scale distributions to thousands of people, and we had to learn as we went. So I have more experience I was trained by some really great people in this. I was trained by some really competent people who were who had a lot of experience in disaster response. And one of the things that they did well was by allowing me the experience and putting projects in my hands and giving me the opportunity to figure it out and giving me the confidence that I could do it. So it had to be highly experiential. You know, there wasn't a choice, because there was a lot of work that had to be done, and every pair of hands was working. So I was given some training, and then I was put out to do the work, and they put trust in me to do it. So there definitely was training, and I did get to go on a lot of site visits with my boss. The first distribution that I ever did was with my boss, but then after that I was on my own. I was doing it on my own, and with a whole lot of help of a bunch of people, but I was managing the whole thing. So I'm all into experiential learning. I think that that's the best way to learn a foreign language, although there are other ways, you know, that you could sit and study and read for years, but I really believe in just throwing yourself into another foreign country and having to learn the language, you know. So that's kind of how I approach everything.
It goes back to learning can be discomforting sometimes.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing.
Right.
When you were training people, did you ever see them, especially in this real world setting, did you ever see them make a mistake? And how do you approach them with that as the trainer or educator?
So I had a lot of opportunity to train others, and really it was an honor to be able to do that, because what we would say in our organization all the time is that we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. Like, we want to work and do this work until it's not necessary anymore, and we can completely turn it over to Haitian people, and there is no international NGO. You know, that's the goal, right, with sustainable development. So I did give my staff a lot of, I gave them training and support, but I also gave them a lot of autonomy, and we were managing projects in different provinces in the country, and they had their own budget management. So there were sometimes errors that were made with budget, which was kind of a big deal, because it was usually USAID grants, and they have very strict reporting systems. So there were a few snafus where we like overspent the budget, and because of, you know, oversight of one thing or another. And so when that would happen, we would go over, you know, where the mistake happened and how it happened, but then we would move on. So I think that my staff was kind of surprised at how I acted, and was not, you know, punishing or anything around mistakes, because I really made them understand that they were learning something, and that it was valuable to learn, and that I knew that they would know now about the U.S. government, violation of, you know, buying a motorcycle, which is not allowed, and, you know, but for some, you know, field projects, you need a motorcycle because there's no roads, and that's the only way to get to the target population, you know. So just little things that they had to learn the hard way, but and I continue to give them a lot of autonomy and a lot of opportunity. We had a exchange kind of visit where I got to go to Rwanda and to do a case study in Rwanda in comparison to Haiti in terms of their family tracing and reunification project, reuniting families after a disaster, because that was a huge issue that they had to deal with in Rwanda after the genocide, was trying to find families next of kin for survivors. And I took the staff member with me, and she was really surprised and honored to have the opportunity to go, but I was like, no, you need to learn what I'm learning, because you're going to replace me when I leave, you know. Wow. And making that really clear that you need to be passing on knowledge and training to the people below you, because they need to be able to step up and replace you. And my goal was always to leave, because it needed to be turned over to Haitian staff.
That is a beautiful development philosophy. I might use that in my DPMI paper, but I really like that. And we always talked about that in undergrad, this sort of inherent problem with development, because it is a job, but it doesn't have to be an inherent problem if you're looking at it.
Well, and I could talk to you a whole hour about that, but we have a role in development. If your goal is to work in development, we have a role, and my role, as I saw it, because I did have one snarky staff member who said, you know, why do you get to be the manager? Why, you know, what makes you better than anybody else? And how come?
Who was Haitian?
Yeah.
Okay.
And why can't a Haitian person do your job? And I was like, you know what, you're right. I would like it if a Haitian person did my job, because that's what we want. You know, but unfortunately, the way that it is right now, so much of our funding comes from the U.S. government. I have to be able to report in both French and English. I have to be able to understand the complex reporting system and budgeting system of the U.S. government, and to be able to report in English. And when we find a Haitian staff member who has that ability, like that high enough language and English ability, and also budget management ability, then we try to hire them. But we need American people to liaise with the U.S. government, because so much of our funding came from them, and that's the case in a lot of developing countries. So I was very comfortable with my role as managing projects, managing budgets, and doing the reporting in English that had to be done, supporting staff in their activities. And in the emergency situation, yes, sometimes I was the person on the floor with the flashcards teaching the children about hygiene, but that's not how it should be. It should, and it was, 99% of the time it was Haitian people who are coming from that culture, that language base, that are at the ground level with the people.
Yeah.
When it's emergency, it's different because in an emergency, the local people themselves are so affected that they have a hard time responding. In my organization at CRS, we were fortunate that of the 300 staff that we had, nobody died because everybody was at work and our building didn't fall. And so a lot of them had family members die who were at home because they lost their homes. And they continued to come to work. They came to work every day and they did food distributions and they handed out tents when they themselves were sleeping under the rain and had nothing. And their hearts were breaking and they were showing up for work and doing it anyway. So I learned a lot, and but I also saw the strength of international organizations and people from outside coming in who had the money, the resources, the strength, and who weren't directly affected by the earthquake. So we do have a role, but it's a fine line to walk, and I do believe that. I remember Professor Levenger saying also in DPMI, she said, if you were a Peace Corps volunteer, that's the closest you're ever going to be to working at the community level. From there on, it shouldn't be that way. You're not going to be integrated in the local community, living at the same level as them. That's just not how it works. And it's true. And so sometimes it's hard to find that balance between being a part of a community, helping a community. I mean, we left this humongous camp where we were, and we tried to get people to go back into neighborhoods. And Sean Penn himself came into the camp where we were, and was on the news and was like, I'm living alongside the people, I'm struggling alongside the people, we're doing this together, we're surviving together, we're recovering together. And then a huge hurricane came and wiped him out, along with everybody else, because he insisted on living in a tent next to the people who were actually needed to live in tents because they lost their homes. So he lost all of his medical equipment, his computers, everything, because they were living in tents on the ground. So then they wised up and they bought a big fancy house and put 50 staff in it. So they didn't live luxuriously, but they lived in safety at least, and away from danger, so that when the population was in danger and in need, they weren't also
they could also continue their work.
Yeah. So it was an interesting lesson. He was at all the UN trainings I went to. He tried to educate himself. So
I saw his State Department a few times.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's got
Hillary
close
Clinton's
friends.
right-hand woman, I forget her name. She was Bill Clinton's lawyer too. Anyway,
Okay.
She's very involved with.
Yeah, he's got a lot of good friends in high places, and that was a good thing about having him around, because we're like, we need to do a cholera assessment, and we need to do a food distribution, blah blah blah. And he's like, I can get you a helicopter. I can call the, blah blah blah, and get you helicopters from the U.S. government. So. You need a helicopter.
Yeah. Wow.
He could do that, and he's learned a lot, and I've seen him speak since then, and he's. I mean, we all admit, all of us who were in Haiti, we admit that we made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
We made so many mistakes. It was such a complex emergency that nobody knew how to respond to in the beginning stages, and
Cheryl Mills.
Cheryl Mills. Okay.
Do you know her?
I don't know her.
I
don't know if she spent time in Haiti, but
she's Hillary Clinton's right-hand woman, and Haiti was her thing.
Oh, good.
Yeah. She's
good.
Very strong. I met her this summer.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
See, I digress.
It's okay. So if you look on the paper, there are some philosophies of education that were brought up in our reading. So there's liberalism, which has more to do with content, just delivering the knowledge. Behaviorism, it stresses behavior change. Progressivism focuses on experiential learning that deals with problem solving. Humanism has more to do with personal internal growth, and radicalism is seeking to bring about social change, basically. So So these are sort of, there's a quiz you can take and so on and so forth, but
And see where you fall.
yeah. Do you think you could identify where you would probably fall, where your priorities lie, mostly?
For myself, getting educated, for me to learn, or for me to the style of educating or training.
Style of educating.
I think probably somewhere between behaviorism and progressivism. Probably progressivism.
Okay. So, and one of the important things when we did this in class was to know where you fall, but then also realize how to utilize the others when training as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just coming in with one viewpoint.
Yeah.
But can you think of any ways that you're able to use progressivism when you're training, or how you focused on problem solving?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that with my team, I had a lot of experienced people that had various backgrounds in social work and that were psychologists. In Haiti, you can be a psychologist with like a 3-year like AA degree. And that, so I emphasized that they could build on their previous experience and their previous learning, because I wasn't a psychologist or sociologist or a social worker that could teach them that, but that we were going along the principles of our organization, which our mission statement was all about, the human dignity of a person, and how do we uphold that, and how do we augment that in a situation where we're providing services to them. So I tried to tell them that they had what it took to do the job, and that they had enough experience, and that I was just giving them some new information that they could add to what they already knew, and that I trusted them and their intelligence to navigate the situations, what they would need to, the resources that they would need in any given situation, they would probably find from within. So maybe that's humanism. I don't know, but that they could learn by doing. That they had internal resources and that they could really learn, because the things, if you're talking about hygiene promotion, it's very straightforward and basic, but it needs to be trained. And how to wash your hands, and how to purify water, and it seems like very basic information, but it's something that is neglected, and for various reasons, resources that are lacking, water, soap, whatever, and people get sick and they die. So it is a life and death thing, but trusting that they would know how to talk to a child or an elderly person or whoever it was with the right approach, because of their previous background with psychology and with social work, that they would be able to get these messages across, and that they would be able to show them in a way that those people would be confident to use that knowledge. So I think progressivism is something, because it's like, oh, I'm a child psychologist, and now all of a sudden I have to teach children how to wash their hands, and it's like, but yeah,
find
it's just
what's transferable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's they had a basis of knowledge for how to communicate with children, or how to communicate with adults, or whatever it was. So I think experiential.
Okay.
Yeah. Once you get them with a faucet and a bucket, they were ready to show how to do it.
So then, more broadly speaking, what is your philosophy of education and training? Maybe we should say training and facilitation.
Probably behaviorism. Because as I stated in the beginning, that I think training is important, because you're wanting to see a change in behavior. In Toastmasters, somebody can read the manual on how to give 10 speeches, and they can even deliver 10 speeches without changing their behavior, continuing to do ums and ahs, and continuing to have the same verbal quirks or whatever it is. So actually putting an emphasis on behavior change is what we do in the evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we say this time you did this well, and it was demonstrated in this way. So I think behaviorism is probably my number one.
Great. I did my first evaluation.
Did you?
Scary.
I think you'd be good at that.
So the very last question, are there any techniques that you think are important or that we haven't touched on that you use with adults?
Oh, I just think it's important to have fun and not be afraid to have fun with adults.
Okay.
And to get, and I've seen it now more, I wanted to say that it's more accepted in like international development, you know, that because in cultures where people are used to gathering together to do experiential things together or to sing or to dance, and where that's not silly or embarrassing, you know. In American culture it's like silly or embarrassing if you have to dance in front of somebody. That's like awful. But a lot of places they delight in dancing together. So, but I think it's changing. I did a staff training here. I participated in a staff training at Monterey Institute. I was being trained, and they gave us all these pipe cleaners that were all different colors, so that when we were sitting there listening to the speaker, we could play with them and make shapes and designs, and they said, we want you to do this. We want you to be being creative and playing with stuff as you're listening, because some people listen better and hear better when their hands are busy. And they actually, so we all, you know, so like top people, I mean like the president and like people in the organization were playing with these pipe cleaners and making shapes and stuff. So I learned from that. I was like, wow, even like serious subject matter, it was boring HR stuff, but we could have fun while we were doing it and be distracted by something and be creative, and that might help us to remember things better. So I would say having fun is important, and you don't have to carry a training yourself. I taught a workshop this spring. I taught a workshop over 2 days, a 2-day workshop on the SPHERE training, which is standards for humanitarian aid. It goes through four different areas of what are the standards for shelter, what are the standards for food security, water and sanitation, and health. Did I say health? No. Shelter was the first one. So, and we go over those, and it's a training that everyone who works in a disaster has to take. And so we offered it here on campus, and I was thinking, what am I going to do with intelligent adult learners, graduate students, for 2 days, 8 hours a day, you know, filling up time with information and keeping them engaged. And I was really nervous about it because it's a lot of time to have to fill. And people loved it. It was super engaging because I co-taught it with Ed Lawrence. We broke it up into sections. We varied the activities, like I was talking about earlier. We allowed the participants to do some of the training themselves. We allowed them to get really deep into the material and then present parts of it to the rest of the group. And it went by so fast, and we got really great feedback about how it went. So I was really happy with it, and I just realized, like, wow, I'm not in control of this whole thing, and I have to trust the people in the room are intelligent, and they want to learn, and they're going to grasp onto something, and they're going to make something of it too. So it's not all my responsibility to provide brilliant information and amazing anecdotes and fun games and all this stuff, because a lot of the people in the room had a lot of their own experience, and you know, that's the thing in appreciative inquiry kind of stuff, like looking at what's in the classroom or in the training, what those people have to bring. So we pulled out, you know, stories from people who had served in Peace Corps. We had 2 people who served in the military. We had, you know, a student who grew up her whole life in Watsonville, right here, in a Spanish-speaking community, but was part of the Loma Prieta flooding. I don't know if I said that right. But her whole town was flooded, you know, and was like doing disaster response in her own community. So there were a lot of really great experiences in the room, and that made me, when I realized that, I was like, oh, I don't have to make all this happen. Like, the people in this training are wanting to bring forth their experience and talk and share, and learn from each other and teach each other. So it was helpful for me to realize I could have fun, I could relax, I could share what I know, but also be willing to create a space for the people there to share with each other as well. And that was huge for me.
Great. Well, that's all I have.
Okay.
So thank you, Molly. Okay. So Toastmasters. I have to go to class in a couple minutes, but I'm still having trouble